Greetings! Today we are exploring our second part of our motivation series. We have a few coaches from Naropa's academic coaching program here. We got Nate and Lindy, and I am Sophia. Second part of this series is going to focus on the good enough view. So as we discussed in the first video, connecting goals to your deepest values can help guide us in staying connected to our motivation. Having realistic, flexible goals are another piece of this puzzle, no? One of the coaches at the program shared that her professor, Dr. Viejos, suggested that the students write on a piece of paper that is visible around their living space, like on a fridge, and write on those papers, I have permission to be average. I have permission to be sloppy. I have the freedom to fail. So with that, with a good enough view, Nate and Lindy, can you tell me how those reflections land for you?
I think it's deeply relieving because that sort of striving to be excellent all the time has so much tension in it. And when you were talking about connecting our goals to our deepest values, I think it's such a beautiful thing to remember that my deepest values are around things that are alive, things like creativity and love and kindness and connection and beauty, and that really those things happen for me when I'm relaxed. And so is there a way I can approach my schoolwork from a relaxed place, even if it means that the product is maybe even a little bit strange? But if it's strange in a creative and loving and connected way, I find that ends up being much more fulfilling than if I'm trying to write a perfect thing based on what I think a teacher is going to want.
Yeah, so beautifully said. I mean, for me, this giving myself permission to be average, to be messy, to fail has been probably the deepest learning of my contemplative education at Naropa so far. For me, it's been a huge challenge, and I see so many students also really struggling with this idea that they have to be somewhere other than where they already are in their work or how they're feeling about it. And just, so just to remind ourselves as students, we're here to learn and to grow. We're not here to have it all figured out. And I think it is so important to, I don't know, Lindy, when you were speaking, what kept on coming up was just, how do we get out of our own way? How do we get out of our own way and clear our way towards our own brilliance, our own capacity for connection and creativity? That's all there.
Could you both define what good enough means for you?
It's so funny. Yeah, I noticed my mind really wants to try and have some metric, some quantitative metric of what is good enough, right? Wouldn't it be so relieving to just have it be that simple? And of course it's not, so for myself, it's, can I love myself? Can I accept myself in this best effort? So for me, it's again, it's this combination of a lot of self-kindness and also self-honesty. So it's not about, making excuses for where we haven't maybe shown up in the way that we would like to based on our values or what's being asked, But yeah, I think good enough is, not putting the pressure on myself to come up with profound insights or to impress someone else, but rather, how am I good with myself right now? Can I let this go?
Last semester, starting grad school for me, I decided that my goal for the semester was to turn everything in on time and to keep my nervous system regulated. And that I wasn't going to worry about how good the papers were, if I did any piece of brilliant writing, like you said, Nate, if I had any brilliant insights. I decided at the beginning, good enough for me was going to be these two things. And so it brought a lot of peace. And I definitely had moments where I started to grumble in myself about oh, this paper isn't very good. And I just remembered this first semester for me isn't for good papers, it's for this other thing. And so I wonder if part of it um, is allowing ourselves the space in any given situation or context to sort of decide for ourselves what's most important.
I'm remembering when I went to undergrad and I had struggled in high school. I was in high school when I was diagnosed with ADHD. And when I went to undergrad, like there was a need to know that I could be a strong student. And I definitely developed patterns that are still there now, where I don't need to know that anymore. But now I have these patterns of like, really, like, I'm going to do as well as I can on an assignment, and letting some of those patterns go, because like what I needed internally, I've already received, and now the patterns kind of they've become a barrier at some points. I was reminded of that listening to you both. So digging in a little bit deeper to what you're both already speaking to, if you could speak to how a good enough view relates to self-care, self-compassion, and Maitri, and what that means for creating time for rest and restore.
Yeah, I think one of the things that this brings up for me is the way that things like our temperaments and our ways of processing and the types of differences in learning and cultural differences, and sort of like all the ways that we experience our actual wholeness in our day-to-day life can sometimes be not very well included in maybe like traditional American educational systems. So I think a lot of us grow up with thinking that we have to be this certain way to be succeeding at school, and that part of what feels like kindness and compassion in relation to good enough and self-care is learning ourselves without judgment, like what really helps us thrive, and learning how we learn best. And maybe we do better with audiobooks, and so we can listen to audiobooks while we take a walk, or maybe we do better being around people and not being alone all the time, and so having study groups.
I love that you speak to bringing self-care into academic work, and like this maybe what is like a false sense of separation or distinction. I think that's so important. Sophia and I we have a professor in the contemplative psychotherapy program who raised this several weeks ago. And it's not to critique self-care, that this is bad, that we shouldn't care for ourselves or ask ourselves what we need based on who we are, as you speak to, Lindy. It's not that, but it's more like you were saying, how can we bring this spirit and this intention of honoring oneself and being gentle and accepting of where one is at in any moment and loving that into our work, and not see, schoolwork, okay, I need to do this, and then I need to care for myself in order to get my meter back to, the level where I can do it again the next day. So I love that you bring this in, and just for me, thinking about the relationship between, self-compassion and loving kindness with good enough. Yeah, I'm having the same kind of experience where they're not separate, so if I am practicing self-compassion and working when it's what I can offer, and resting when that's what I need, if I'm really practicing that awareness of what I need in any moment, I'm getting out of my way so that I can be good enough. So I'm creating the conditions that I need in order to feel that way.
We've talked before about, reframing our beliefs and our ideas. So around that, reframing to acknowledge our strengths, what we've done well, or honoring our development can be super supportive and full of care for oneself. So here's some reframes. Done is better than perfect. Good enough is good enough. You all might have some other ones. Can you speak to reframing self-judgment and reframing negative self-talk?
I think right away about a couple of students I've worked with who are just doing remarkably well in difficult situations. And that seems to be common, that we have a habit of focusing on maybe the one thing that we're behind in, or the thing we didn't do well, when maybe we did 19 things well last week and one thing we don't feel good about. That's where our brain seems to stay. And so part of reframing for me seems to be about how can we help ourselves zoom out and like remember consciously all the things that we did well and the progress that we've made, and to make that a practice, like just to have a kind of willingness to practice focusing on, you know, how many assignments we got done and the one we were excited about, and allow the one that's challenging to sit there but not take up the whole view.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was speaking to the negativity bias of the brain. So important. Like, we're hardwired, our nervous systems and our brains are hardwired to attend to those details. And just noticing and really leaning into how these self-judgments really aren't telling the whole story. And so like you said, Lindsay, zooming out, you know, what is the context? You know, maybe there is a lot going on in someone's personal life, and maybe even just turning the assignment in is a huge accomplishment. So reframing by looking at contexts. And another way I think that can be helpful is, you know, I don't know if people think about parts, having different parts of themselves, but thinking about this parts perspective, where there might be this part that really wants you, really, you know, is very self-critical and nothing is ever good enough. But there is some desire in that part to help. You know, it wants you to learn, or maybe it wants you to be loved, or whatever it may be for that person. So, you know, this practice of awareness, of noticing that part or that inner critical voice, and thanking it, you know, for I know you're trying to care for me, and I appreciate that. And kind of like you spoke to, Sophia, earlier, you know, I no longer this way maybe no longer serves me.
One more thing that I love is the question that somebody taught me, like, if your best friend was sitting next to you having this experience, what would you tell them?
Right.
Or if the person who loves you most in the world was to respond to you right now, what would they say? And just sort of like realizing how harsh we can be with ourselves when we can see others so beautifully. That can be nice.
Yeah.
Thanks for being with us. Here's some reflections to dig in even more. Make a list of what you have already done to see your goals through. What strengths and wisdom have you been bringing? What might you cultivate more of? Write down the beliefs or stories you tell yourself most frequently. What is an alternative? Then post those around your space. Here's an example. I can't focus. An alternative. Short breaks help me to start fresh. What is the balance you need in this moment to be well and your most skillful, open-hearted self?